The third part of the challenge in fatigue management is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Despite the fact that many regulators will try to argue to the contrary, assessing and managing the risks of fatigue can be very different for different types of work groups, workforces, or different types of tasks. At the most simple, consider the following situation. I have two tired people. One person's job is to land a jumbo jet at New York in the middle of a snowstorm, and the other person's job is to operate the photocopy machine. As a community, we are probably more concerned about the person landing the plane than the person operating the photocopy machine. For the photocopy machine operator, the worst that can happen is that they may fall asleep and get two copies instead of one. They may get a paper cut. They may fall asleep on the glass platen. But at the end of the day, the consequences of fatigue are relatively trivial when we compare those to what would be the case in a pilot landing a jumbo jet who made a fatigue-related error. One of the big challenges around fatigue management in the last decade has been that shift away from rules based on determining how fatigued you are and prescribing working time arrangements based around that principle to those which assess the level of risk. And one of the key factors that we'll expect you to think about in this course is the link between the likelihood of fatigue and the consequence of fatigue. Risk is actually a function of the product of the likelihood and consequence. We'll talk about this in more detail later, but for many of you who have been through a risk management process, you'll know that you multiply likelihood by consequence to determine the risk. Up until recently, it has been relatively unusual for organisations to factor in the consequence of a fatigue-related error in any systematic way. But what we hope by the end of this course is that you will be able to look at both the likelihood of fatigue, the consequence of fatigue, and to be able to make a risk-based decision on what would be the most appropriate way to manage that risk.